Well, some of you may be going around crying that your decks and your cards are dead because of the restriction list, much like I expressed my dismay at losing Dorian. There are quite a lot of decks that actually feel revitalized or have a fighting chance again because of this restriction list. So today we will take a look at several decks from both Standard and Premium that essentially have a better fighting chance now, at least theoretically. Sorry, gotta make sure that this is here. Good screen. Anyway, so we're going to speculate on some of the decks that should be resurfacing post-restriction list and after the Vanity set release. And so it should be pretty interesting to see what there actually is for me, especially in Premium, because there I really can't give too much of a solid answer, but I can kind of speculate, whereas in Standard I feel it's also mostly speculation, and the big shame is that we're not actually going to find out how the meta is going to transform for quite some time, because basically the March Spring Fests are cancelled, and so we're not going to find out until, well, not cancelled, delayed, but we're not going to find out how the meta will change until essentially April. So it's going to be Astral Force by then, and that's going to be a whole different set of decks that are getting support. So yeah, pretty big change, pretty interesting how things are going to pace out. So we're going to begin with Standard and take a look at how the meta will change. So the notable restrictions in Standard are that basically the main super aggressive Axel decks, except for Golds, I would say, got a big hit. So Anger Blader basically unplayable. You have to just change up the deck entirely. I still think there is a build for Tachi that is viable, but it just doesn't have the same explosive kill potential that Anger Blader had. And then Pale Moon is literally kind of wiped off the face of the earth. You kind of play End of Stage or things like that. There really isn't much that you can do with Pale Moon right now, sadly, so gotta wait until that Harry support. And then finally, the other Axel deck that got kind of slapped on the wrist at the, to say the least, is Murakumo, which now has to change its build up quite a lot. And it's still, I think, going to be fairly viable, but it loses this big defense that helped it control the tempo and things like that. Whereas Narukami, still is gonna be the best deck basically for a bit of time, but essentially it's not as easy to destroy you with Narukami than it is with Anger Blader. You don't really kill on turn 3 with Vanquisher. It's much more on turn 4 that if you set up your combos with Jagishot, Chatura, etc., that you can really kind of push for a lot of damage and make big nice numbers like 33 quite easily and things like that. So in that sense it's pretty strong, but it doesn't feel as oppressive. I've said this in previous videos as well. But having said that, we're going to take a look at how things have changed. So for me, in Standard, the biggest thing that happens when we have all these Axel decks getting restricted and kind of pushed down a little bit is that Force decks will come up as a result. And we've already been seeing this. Bermuda has already been a Force deck that's out there, but there is one Force deck that managed to be essentially viable for the entirety of the Axel meta, which was Mordred. And people are kind of forgetting it with Claret releasing, but Mordred got some support, and Mordred is basically a pseudo-Axel deck, but without Axel circles, but it still does just about as much rushing and attacks as an Axel deck in a way, and being able to build up such crazy power and just be so aggressive is part of the play for Mordred, and it really is going to be a super strong deck. It has good matchups against other Force decks, it has good matchups against the remaining Axel decks, like Great Nature and Golds, I would say as well, and so I feel like it's going to be quite good, and even the Narukami matchup is, for a smart Mordred player, I think is quite doable. So I think Mordred definitely comes up and definitely should be something that either you should dust off if you own it, or something that you need to look out for if you're playtesting and preparing for events, because Mordred definitely will be coming up. The other Force deck that we've seen coming up, Dimension Police, not just for my personal bias, but I've been talking to some top players and they were saying, yeah, one of our slots for Team League might just be DP. Or, people saying that, they took their DP to shop challenges and did quite well simply because it kind of has good matchups across the board. Keep in mind that we had a meta before BTO6 came out that was really quite diverse. The most oppressive deck of the BTO5 meta was arguably Gobblebusters, Narukami, and even that, it did feel really strong, but part of its strength was that it had a good matchup against all the Axel clans, not so much that it was a good matchup against everything that preceded that Axel meta. And so everything that came out after BTO6 was kind of a creep down, and then Revere came out, but then Revere got restricted, or errated rather. But the thing is basically the entire BTO6 BTO6 meta got restricted outside of Mordred and Dark Irregulars. And so, but those two clans are also considered to be part of the really strong decks out of that set. That entire set was just fire. It was insane how strong that set was, and you lose the two biggest decks from it. Plus then Anger Blader came out, but even when Anger Blader came out, people were saying Mega Colony is a really good Protect deck. Spike Brothers are again very strong. And so the fact that now you take out the decks that didn't let those other decks from those sets shine, it feels almost natural that the other decks from those sets will come up. So I fully expect Spikes, I fully expect Mega Colony, yes. Like, when Mega Colony released with Gun and Colio, me and quite a few of the other top players that I know were saying this is a good card, and therefore a good, like, the whole deck is good because of the supporting pieces are good, and we tested it on EX and everything, and it was just good. Like, the only reason why it couldn't shine was because the Axel meta was just too oppressive, and therefore the slightly slower decks just couldn't really do anything. And so Dark Irregulars as well has already been coming up. Dark Irregulars was kind of played as the answer to Revere by a lot of players and would still top during the Revere meta pre-errata. And so the fact that now we have the errata and Dark Irregulars is still the same deck, I mean for quite some time until we get like Sharot in the upcoming set, essentially, like, I think Dark Irregulars is a safe pick as well, and overall just Protect decks as a whole are showing a comeback. So, because as the Axel meta goes down, the Force meta goes up, and the answer to Force is Protect. And therefore you have still these strong Axel decks that can still survive and still play against everything, and then you have the Force decks that come up as a result of the oppressive Axel decks not being there, and then as a result of the Force decks being everywhere, you have the Protect decks there to stop them. I think the only Protect deck that doesn't really come back as much is maybe OTT. That was quite, I mean, it was pretty frequently played upon release, Tsukuyomi that is, and then it kind of just faded out after the next set came out, and then the only Protect decks you really saw were DI and Mega Colony, and then Angel Feather in the WGP. And so now we had the WGP build of Angel Feather, which you can watch if you haven't already. I have a separate video for that. But then now we have Melkoth Melek that came out, and that card is also really good. That entire deck is really strong. You basically can play the Protect 2 variant, that you can have like big columns with big interceptors and just overall hit for big numbers, be able to revive things really quickly, get your rescue checks, essentially rescue checks, pretty easily. And so the upcoming Astral Force Angel Feather deck is looking really, really good. So Protect decks as a whole are coming up and up and up. We have a lot of Force clans coming out, literally try-threes, all three Force clans, and therefore there's going to be a lot of Force, and therefore Protect is kind of the answer. And I think that's kind of the projection that we can expect the game to go later on. And Genesis as well was already pretty okay and consistent. Himiko Control, or Himikon as the Japanese side calls it, is quite strong, simply because they can damage deny and then just have crits everywhere. They got a supporting double rare grade 3 in the upcoming Astral Force set, which lets you copy the critical and power gained from triggers by your Vanguard. Therefore, when you use Himiko to gain triggers, you can put them all on the Vanguard and that grade 3 will also gain them. And therefore, Himiko Control is really, really strong, and it was already seen as a good pick in the Revere meta, and so now I think going forward it's going to be still seen as a good pick for the upcoming meta too. So yet another Force deck to look out for, and Uranus and Valkyrion obviously gets big support and it's going to be a very consistent deck now. I would say maybe not super consistent, but much more consistent, and therefore, you know, both consistent in Force marker production as well as also the, you know, Valkyrion searching and just getting your grade 3s into your hand and all that good stuff. So I think the clan is honestly getting good buffs and it should be staying for quite some time, even though, you know, it's going to lose the main character power after the Shin season ends. I'd like to also say that I could see Royal Paladin make a comeback before Altmile as well. Gancelot was played and always came up like in 1 or 2 tops every season, even during Revere meta, I believe. And so Gancelot potentially still has potential. My lexical knowledge and just vocabulary choices are insane today. But that deck, I think, also still has a chance to easily just come up and be able to take games as well, simply because of Gancelot's entire condition. But I wouldn't be surprised if we have to wait until Altmile to get that really... Oh, Altmile, I'm really excited about it. It's so toolboxy and so versatile, and there's so much that it can do, even in Standard, and boy do I love it. But I think that kind of wraps it up for Premium. It's essentially, I would say, you take out the BTO6 meta-defining clans and Anger Blader and Bermuda, and you get what was left of that, you know? So essentially you get your, like, I think Neonectar is the only clan from the recent releases that doesn't really shine too much. And even with the restrictions, Arboros was just a bit too slow. But then you get Asha coming up, you know, literally right around the corner, so it's like, you're gonna be fine anyway. They're gonna make Asha good no matter what because they want her to sell. So, that concludes it more or less for Standard. Now looking at Premium, we've had some preliminary shop challenges happening here and there in Germany and in the UK especially, and also in Australia. And so we've seen some interesting results, and I would say that it's kind of hard to make any conclusions so far, because the tops we've been kind of seeing include Luard, include Victor of all things, and also include Azel, and so there's a bunch of things that are topping after this restriction list, and it's kind of hard to say what really is, you know, like, I think the conclusion that we can draw from the decks that come in after this restriction list is anything that had a terrible matchup against Azel now is allowed to play. Now is allowed to compete, because as long as your matchup against DI and Katrina isn't too bad, you're okay. But the interesting thing is, looking at those shop challenges that have happened so far, there's not that many people taking Katrina or DI, and they're basically mostly playing all the other clans, and especially all the tier 2 clans that were silenced by Azel. And so that's why you see like Victor topping and things like that, simply because, I mean, it can kind of fight. I still don't think it's a tier 1 deck, and as much as I would love it to be, because it's one of my favorite premium MG decks of all time, but I still don't think it has a good enough fighting chance. But against inexperienced players, or basically in a fresh meta where nobody knows what's going on, I definitely think that it's a viable pick. Now, to me, I think Luar definitely comes out also pretty hot. Like, obviously Neonectar and DI not getting restricted, I think that goes without saying that they'll be good, and that they'll be popular, and they'll be at your tournaments. And, you know, even though plans are very kind of like, I would say, tempo-based in a way, it's not so much that, like, you know, crazy game knowledge, but it's a lot more of just knowing how to manage your resources really carefully and min-maxing with every little card. I think is kind of the strong part of the deck, and so you really need to know plants really well to play them really well. Like, from my own experience, I can really vouch for this, and, you know, people say it's brain dead, but in my opinion, plants is far from brain dead, because the difference between a good plants player and a bad plants player is night and day. Like, I can tell you that much. And I think I'm still a very bad plants player, and I want to learn to be like Seiji level, but it's not that easy. So, looking at Azel, however, who got the biggest hit essentially, Azel lost its high roll potential because they lost Wonder Azel. So now people are playing the V-Series Wonder Azel and essentially choosing to run it as a deck that can ensure the superior ride early more certainly, essentially, because of the Wonder Azel, obviously. And then also you're able to do like the new Wonder Azel into Dindre and like CC combo and like things like that. So you get a bit of new tools to use, but because you've lost so much of that high roll potential, the deck feels more fair. So it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure where Azel is going to go. That seems like one of the camps that it can go into, but for now it's a bit hard to really make any conclusions. Then we have the Luard in general, that got quite a lot of new tools out of the Vanity set. And so Luard is interesting. We saw one list from a player named Seiso, who essentially ran it pretty interesting with only one Belial Owl, but, I mean, some players were cutting Belial Owl entirely, but we essentially saw that this build was running things like the new Morion Spear, and basically a lot of cards that can help fill your drop zone faster, because that's what Claret does in Standard. And so you take a lot of these cards that just mill like crazy and fill your drop zone for ritual like crazy, and then you put them into Luard, and what do you get? An amazing deck. You know, a deck that can achieve its win con with Morfessa even faster, and therefore now it doesn't get killed by Azel as fast. And I mean, I need to note that Luard came top 8 at Worlds. You know, it's not like it was completely dead even though Azel was around. This was one of the decks that was trying to do well in Premium, but was simply struggling. We also saw, I mean, Grand Blue come second, and if it can come second in Azel meta, then I wonder what it can do with a meta where Azel isn't as prominent. You know, I feel like that deck could really blow up, but I really don't know anything about Grand Blue and Premium, so I feel like, you know, we have to wait and see what happens, but I could definitely see Grand Blue coming up simply because of its showing at Worlds, even though the deck didn't do something super flashy at Worlds, but the fact that it made it all the way to finals already goes to show that there's something happening there. Now, Kagero I think will still stay around in Premium as well. The deck didn't take any hits, and basically Azel, I don't know how bad of a matchup it was for Kagero, but it has a lot of good matchups throughout the board, and I think overall Kagero should be still a safe pick with the Overlord, the Cross, and the End variant. And then looking forward, I think it's just really hard to make any other conclusions right now. I think we have to wait for more shop challenges and more events that aren't cancelled. Any like VGCSs, any other tournaments that have premium in them, I think will help us get a grasp of what the meta will look like. So it's a shame because due to all the cancelled and delayed events, we're not going to be able to get a better scope of the meta, but I think it's not that bad because, I mean, it just takes it a bit longer for this meta to be solved, and that actually is more exciting for the player base that's just casually playing in their shops or at home through remote fights and other things. So I think it's going to be nice for the player base to have this another extra month of just unsolved metas and being able to play whatever they want, because there's no concrete vision of what is the best deck right now. And I mean, obviously you can say for standard Vanquisher is the best deck, but then you still have so many decks that are viable and can still fight against it. And so same with premium, you know, there's still a lot of question marks and it's really hard to say. I personally think Luard is one of the better decks to come out of it. So I would say like Luard, Plants, DI are kind of the top 3 of my list there, and maybe Grand Blue, but I really don't know what Grand Blue does. It's just based off the fact, I mean, I know what it does, but it's mainly based off the fact that, you know, it came second at Worlds. I think that is a big indicator that Grand Blue has something up their sleeves that could make them a big force to be reckoned with. So that's going to be it for this video on the decks that I expect to get strengthened by the restriction list. And so keep in mind that obviously we have the Vanity set, we have the Astral Force coming up as well, which I think Angels will take a fat intake from that in premium. You know, I need to start getting on the drawing board and checking out how I can upgrade my Gavriel loop. But I think there's a lot of things you can do with the new support, and we're also going to have a new premium collection in Japan in May, and in English I think in June, July, I can't remember which month it was, but pretty soon, and that's going to change up like premium entirely, like completely. So that's something to look forward to, but for now, that's going to be my thoughts for the day. So let me know what you guys think. Which decks do you think will get strengthened and will pop up more, both in standard and premium? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. So that's going to be it for me today. Don't forget to become a channel member if you wish to. The join button is next to the subscribe button, and thank you so much to the current channel members as well. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.